This is the Sabre Coach Kate podcast, where I highlight the great thinkers, athletes, and coaches in the dynamic sport of Olympic fencing.
Guard. Boy, howdy.
David Sierra started fencing at Texas A&M when he needed a PE credit and didn't want to sign up for Advanced Weightlifting or Aerobic Power-walking. Since then, he has worked his way up the referee ranks and is currently the co-owner of Cutting Edge Fencing Center, a Sabre-only club near Fort Worth, Texas. Listen as he describes what the fencing world was like back when he started in the 90s and the changes he has helped bring to our sport as both a tournament organizer and a member of the U.S. Fencing Board of Directors. He'll also talk about what it's like to start your own fencing club and offers advice to anyone looking to do the same. Important note, yes, David is my beloved husband. We both decided to pursue this interview from an impersonal, impartial journalistic perspective as much as possible, and not as a married couple. This is his story, not ours. Tune in today to hear what David Sierra, an up-and-coming Sabre coach, club owner, and referee, has to say about the history and the future of fencing. Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in today. This is the Sabre Coach Kate podcast, and I am delighted to have with me today Maestro David Sierra. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks, Kate, for having me on. I've been following your podcast ever since the beginning, and you've had some great interviews. I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions today and talking to you about the great sport of fencing.
Awesome. You started fencing in college at Texas A&M. Why did you choose to fence?
So this is kind of one of those interesting stories about how the sport sort of finds people that I find. And when I was a freshman at Texas A&M, I wanted to take a PE class because I was a science major and I had a bunch of labs and I needed a 1-hour credit class to kind of fill in some holes. And I was like, well, I don't want to take another lab. Let me take a PE class. Well, A&M has 60,000 undergraduates, and there's a waiting list for any sort of PE class. So by the time a freshman with the last name of Sierra gets around to being allowed to register, there's not a whole lot of options left. And it came down to a choice between advanced weightlifting, aerobic walking, and beginning fencing. I don't know anybody that I've talked to, that I've told this story to, that said they would have made a different decision.
That's true.
So I took beginning fencing in the PE class at Texas A&M, and then swiftly joined the fencing club there. I fenced at Texas A&M for a couple of years there before transferring to UT San Antonio to finish out my undergraduate degree. And then that's when I moved to San Antonio is when I started taking lessons with George Pujardieu in San Antonio.
Okay, and what weapon or weapons did you fence?
So like everybody back in those days, this was in 1993 when I started. We started in foil. And it was dry foil in that beginner fencing class. But very, very, very soon, I had the opportunity to try both epee and sabre in the club environment at Texas A&M.
So not in the class, but in the club.
Not in the class, in the club.
Okay.
And I loved it. That was fantastic. I continued taking dry foil classes throughout the 4 years, or the 4 semesters I was there at Texas A&M. Because I needed I ended up taking a PE class every year. And so they had beginning fencing, they had intermediate fencing, and then they had advanced fencing. And you could take advanced fencing twice.
That's pretty rare. I mean, to have more than beginning fencing on campus.
There was actually a pretty substantial class program there at Texas A&M at the time. It was all foil. So I was continuing taking foil group classes at the time, and then fencing sabre in the club. Took a couple of lessons with a couple of different people around that time. Also, when I went home I took some lessons from Maitre Pouge, as we called him, during the summer. And, I really enjoyed Sabre because of the speed and the movement of it. And that's how I got started. I fenced on the club team at Texas A&M. We won Texas Collegiate Championships in what's now known as SWIFA, my second year there. And I had met some really great people, and I'm still friends with some of the folks that I met the very first weeks of fencing at Texas A&M.
Well, and that was back in the dry Sabre days.
Well, Sabre had been electrified for a little bit, but there wasn't a lot of electric Sabre going around. So what might happen was you'd fence a tournament and it would be pools, and then pools would be dry, and then they might share equipment and sort of get everybody going in the DE rounds to try and pool equipment so that everybody could fence the DE bouts electrically. That sort of changed. Started getting more and more electric Sabre going around. By the time I was 3 or 4 years later, it was pretty much all electric at that point. But that was definitely at the beginning of the transition period. Now, what I did start out fencing was with the flesh. We could cross and we could run. And so I remember when they took the flesh away. That was a big deal.
I bet. I bet.
Yeah.
And was dry Sabre as brutal as everybody makes it out to be?
Yes. I'm just going to leave it there. It was bad. It was pretty rough, particularly collegiate fencers who didn't have a whole lot of training. It was rough. There's
Right.
no two ways about it.
You've mentioned Maître Poujardieu several times, or Pouge, as he was called. Tell me more about him and your relationship with him.
So, Pouge was this guy who was a coach in San Antonio, where I'm originally from. And he was he was the son, actually, of a French fencing master that had been brought over to the United States to work at the modern pentathlon group that was headquartered in San Antonio. And then Pouge then went on to get on his own French master certification from France. Came back to San Antonio, opened a club in San Antonio, and was really kind of one of the first people around this area who had an independent fencing club, not connected with a college, not connected with a school, made his living being a fencing coach. He had a small little facility on the north side of San Antonio, 3 strips. Everything was lessons, very classic French style. He really was an inspiration to me personally for becoming a fencing coach. The idea of you can do this as a living. You can do this you can love this sport and you can be connected into it past your competitive expiration date, shall we say. When I was starting out as a fencing coach, Pouge was dying of lung cancer. And I remember I went to him at a tournament in Austin at the Longhorn, where we were having a sort of a celebration of Pouge's life. And I told him, I said, hey Pouge, I'm starting a fencing club. I'm going to be a fencing coach. And he was like, I know you can do it, but just remember, it's always about the students. Just keep that in mind. It's about the students. And so that's something I've always kept in mind as I'm teaching, as I'm coaching, as I'm working in the club. I always think of Pouge's comments about that. It's about my fencers. It's not about me. It's about them.
He sounds like a really neat guy.
He was a character. There is no two ways about it.
What was he like? French?
French. French. There's just no other way to describe it. He was a really, really interesting guy, but a very, very nice man, and cared a lot about his students and cared a lot about the sport of fencing in general.
Who were some other people who had an impact on your fencing? Like you mentioned that you had some friends on the college fencing team. Who were they? And anybody else that impacted your competitive fencing career?
Okay, so back then, there were 3 of us that started fencing at Texas A&M at the time. We had a fellow by the name of Scott Anderson and then Allison Frary. The 3 of us went around to every single tournament we could get our hands on in Texas. I fenced saber, Allison fenced foil, and Scott was an epee fencer.
A good trifecta there.
A good trifecta. And so we traveled around to everything. I also took some lessons in saber with Eric Millay. And
he was around back then?
He was around back then. He came to Texas A&M a couple times to give some lessons to some of the college kids there. I took some saber lessons, believe it or not, from Mauro Hamza.
I didn't know he did saber. Wow.
Yeah, and I took a couple of lessons just from anybody who could get me to teach me anything. That's what I was working with at the time, and then of course we were figuring it all out on our own. There weren't a lot. Saber here in Texas at the time there was not a lot of it. It was very, very backwards, shall we say. Mm-hmm. So as I became a coach and as I became interested in refereeing and things like that, I had to get a lot more training from outside the region and find other people to teach me the ins and outs of saber. And then the coaches that we had working here in this region, Jerry Benson, Vinnie Bradford, people like that, I used as resources for how to teach, how to learn how to be in the sport, how to learn how to move as a coach, how to conduct a business as a coach. Of course, at the same time I'm doing this, I'm also going to graduate school or undergraduate and graduate school for my other career, which was I was a research scientist. I have a graduate degree in cell molecular biology from UT Southwestern Medical Center. So I was doing these two training paths back to back. I was learning about research scientists. I ended up working on portions of the Human Genome Project for my graduate thesis, and then worked as a research scientist in a lab after finishing my graduate degree. And then at the same time, I'm learning how to be a referee and learning how to be a coach and doing apprenticeships around. Jim Carpenter was up here in Dallas at the time. I spent a lot of time. He and I worked side by side. I learned a lot from him about coaching and about how to interact with athletes and how to interact with high-level athletes and how to work with good fencers at that time. And he taught me a surprising amount about how the weapons interact and how things work with fencing. Even though he was an epee guy, fencing is fencing in many respects. And so you have to make the adaptations for the specific weapon. But there's a lot that I learned from Jim, working side by side with him. In addition to working with, going up and taking coaching classes from Jerry Benson, going down to San Antonio, taking coaching classes from Vinnie Bradford, and then going outside the region, learning from Ariana Klinkoff, going to clinics with Ed Corfanti. I recently, this past fall, went down to Central America as part of the Pan American Confederation coaching education course, and Zoran Tulum, who's the head men's saber coach for the United States, was giving the course. So I spent 2 weeks down there with Zoran learning his material. I'm a firm believer that if you're a coach, you have to keep learning. You can't stop. You have to keep constantly learning new things. Our sport is a very fast-moving one, and you have to be constantly educating yourself about what's going on in our sport and in sport in general.
You mentioned several apprenticeships with Jim Carpenter and other people in the area. So what made you decide to start your own club rather than continue working under a head coach at another club?
Well, again, it's sort of one of those things where opportunities present themselves and you kind of just have to go with what the universe is presenting you. There was a rec center program in a suburb of Fort Worth called North Richland Hills that had been passed around to a number of different coaches here in North Texas. I think half the coaches here in North Texas had taught at that rec center program at one time or another. It was up for grabs. And so Brenda Wattops called me up and she's like, hey, I know you're working up in Grapevine with Jim and the Grapevine Fencers Club, and you've got a couple of saber fencers up there, but do you want to try and take over this program in North Richland Hills? And I was like, oh man, I'm not ready to be a coach. I'm not ready to be a head coach, I should say. I'm not ready to run my own program, but okay, I guess I'll do it. And for about 6 months, I was running classes and teaching in both places, both in Grapevine and in North Richland Hills. And then I was like, I think I need to do this full time. Already this even my not my full time gig at the time. I was still working as a research scientist. I was still in grad school at the point. But this needs to be the place where I coach exclusively. And Jim was very gracious about that. He was like, absolutely, I support you 100%. Go with my blessing. You're ready. And so I did. And that program became what is now cutting edge fencing. And so we started in the recreation center at the North Richland Hills Recreation Center, the old one, which was since been torn down. And we grew from beginner classes to I started giving lessons, and more classes, and a program, and then we outgrew the recreation center, and it was then time to get a lease at my own facility, and that was a leap of faith. So.
Mm-hmm. And how big was that first facility?
3 strips, 1,400 square feet, and that included the armory, the office, the bathroom, and the parent waiting area. It was pretty darn small. It was tight, but we laid a lot of really good foundation at that place. I moved into that facility. I had 10 fencers moving out of the rec center that came with me to that facility. I had more fencers at the recreation center, but a lot of them just didn't move over for some reason or another. But 10 people came over from the recreation center to that first facility, and then more people came. And we started advertising, and we started running more classes, and we did different things, and we grew.
And how long were you at the small facility?
I was there about, 3.5 years or so, and then we moved into our current facility, which is about 5,300 square feet, which has a lot more space, we have 5 full tournament-sized strips. We have 2 practice strips. We have a classroom area, plus bathrooms, plus armory, plus office, plus parent waiting area. It's a great space that we have now, but it takes a lot of work to maintain it. And we have a staff of coaches and people who teach stuff and lots of people coming in. Again, it was a leap of faith moving into that facility, but we did, and we're making it work, and somehow it's paying the bills.
That's always a good thing. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start their own fencing club?
Oh, there's a lot of pieces of advice. I guess it would depend upon where they're coming from, what kind of person I'm talking to. If I was talking about someone who... Actually, allow me to restate your question a little bit, I think. If I was to talk to someone who wanted to be a fencing coach, what I would tell them is, don't just learn fencing. Also learn business, learn marketing, learn accounting, learn how to deal with customers, learn sports science. There's so much that goes into running a fencing club that is separate and apart and above and beyond fencing itself. There's dealing with the landlord. There's dealing with energy, suppliers. There's, dealing with equipment vendors. There's, negotiating a good rate on your cable internet. It's just so many different things. Doing the business marketing, doing social media marketing, doing advertising. So if I was to tell somebody who wants to open a fencing club, it's know what you're getting into, because there's a lot more that goes into it other than just teaching fencing.
It's pretty ironic that you didn't follow your own advice. You knew none of that stuff before you started.
I didn't. My training was as a scientist. I have a graduate degree in cell molecular biology. Now that's actually something that's come in handy, because I approach fencing and the science stuff. There's a lot of sports science out there that's really, really good, and I have no problem reading a scientific paper about training or injury prevention or how to train kids or things of that nature. And I can read the scientific literature, and that's come in very, very handy over the years. And I had good training when I was in grad school about just how to do things, and so I've been able to figure stuff out over the years. The business side stuff is not hard; it's not brain taxing per se. It just takes a lot of work, and that's the important thing. There's a lot of work that goes into running a fencing club. That's not just fencing. It's work. No mistake. No two ways about it. It's fun, but it's work.
What do you enjoy most about having your own club?
The freedom to experiment with new training ideas, the freedom to develop my style as a coach, the freedom to work with a broad range of athletes. I've got kids that I work with, I've got teenagers that I work with, I've got young adults, and I've got veterans. So I interact with people from all across all levels of life. And that's a lot of fun. I really, really enjoy that. I also enjoy coaching training. I'm getting now. We have a stable of coaches, younger coaches at the club, who are learning the ropes of how to coach, and I'm helping to teach them and showing them how to give a cue. How do you make somebody attack in 4? That's a good question. So how do you do that? Well, you got to make an invitation. Well, when you make the invitation, do you do it with just your hand? Do you step back? All those kind of questions, it goes into, well, what are you trying to make the fencer do? What is it you want them to accomplish? And so you have to develop your cues so that you understand what is it you're trying to make the fencer accomplish. And I really love that process of going through and experimenting of how can I make this person do something? How can I make my fencers react in different ways? And how can I help them learn different skills? Plus also, how can I help them learn the non-fencing skills, the stuff that sport teaches, beyond just being able to hit somebody with a metal stick? The confidence, the self-assuredness, let's face it, it takes a lot of guts to stand out there on a strip all by yourself with a meter of steel in your hand across from somebody who also has a meter of steel in their hand, and you're both trying to hit each other. I don't think those of us who've been in the sport for a long time appreciate sometimes just how scary that is to an 8-year-old or even a 25-year-old who's doing it for the first time. It's downright scary sometimes. And so how do you teach people how to deal with that? And how does that impact their life in positive ways? That's something I really enjoy.
And what do you like least about club ownership?
Dealing with my landlord.
Okay, I would have thought paying bills, but okay, dealing with your landlord. What is your coaching philosophy? You've kind of alluded to it, I think, from what you learned from Pooj, and you've just explained that you like teaching the additional aspects of sport rather than just fencing. But specifically, what is your particular coaching philosophy?
It's a difficult question to answer because there's so many things that go into that idea of a coaching philosophy. I would say, first of all, athlete-centered. So that means the athlete is first and foremost. It's about what is the athlete trying to achieve on strip. You won't find me on the side of the strip yelling at my athletes, for example. I'm not going to be screaming at them. I'm not going to be yelling at the referees. That's just not the way I behave. I'm not going to be coaching in an abusive manner. I'm not going to be coaching in a manner that drives people to perform. I try and have the students lead as much as possible. I want them to take the initiative for their training. I will now, once they make the decision that they want to do it, I certainly will guide them. And I'll help show them. I'm like, this is what you want to do. And, okay, you have these particular goals you want to achieve. Okay, let's sit down and figure out how are we going to achieve those. What does it take to go into those kind of things? Another aspect of my coaching philosophy that I would say is taking, again, this consideration of the entire person. What can sport teach particularly young people, besides the mechanics of hitting somebody with a metal stick or kicking a ball or putting a ball through a hoop. It's the discipline, it's the camaraderie, it's the enjoyment of physical activity. And in fencing, it's an individual sport. I think it's Jen Oldham who says fencing is an individual sport in a team atmosphere or a team community or something like that. And that's so true. It requires a team in order to be successful in fencing. You have to have a group of people that you work with, and that, and sometimes people don't get along all the time. And so how do you navigate those kind of questions? And how do you work together in this kind of environment where you're all striving your best, trying to do stuff, and then at the end of the day, you got to still be friends, or at least be friendly. Mm-hmm. So that's really important for kids. And then similarly speaking, my adults who compete, same idea. They enjoy the aspects of sport that help give them a place of community, a place to work, to sweat. I help try and involve them in mentoring the younger kids, sometimes even just by example. This is what a smart, good person, a successful person looks like in life. This is someone you can look up to. Okay, you want to be an engineer? Well, we've got a couple of engineers at our club. Okay, you want to be a teacher? We've got a couple of teachers at our club. We got a scientist? I've been a scientist. We got lawyers, doctors, the whole 9 yards. All those kind of people are important. I think it's important for kids to see and understand and have some access to. And then again, the adults as well. They have that community. They learn about themselves a lot of times. I have people who started competing as veterans or in their late 30s, and some of them are actually pretty good. So fencing has helped them to develop themselves as well.
So we've talked about you as an individual fencer and coach, and we've talked about the club, but you've had a real impact on fencing in Texas and in our region. Before there was Region 5, we were known as the Southwest section around here. So talk about your role in creating the Southwest section circuit and why it was important to create that and the eventual impact it had on U.S. fencing. Okay,
so this is going back, actually, I can't take credit for starting the Southwest section circuit. That actually goes to BJ Smiley Goins from Austin. She was the section chair at the time, and she came up with this idea of having this circuit of events in one in each of the different divisions of the Southwest section, and having some point total at the end of the season. So she did that for a couple of years. I competed in it, and then it's sort of I think she wasn't section chair anymore. And it kind of went away, and I had moved up to Dallas, and I don't remember who was section chair at the time. I think it was Gary Murray. I went to him and I said, hey, I want to restart the Southwest section circuit. And he was like, okay, put together a proposal. So I sat down with Brenda Wattops and Jerry Benson and Oscar Barrera, and we hammered out a series of bylaws for what the Southwest Section Circuit Cup could be. The idea was there would be one tournament in each of the divisions of the section. At that time, it was North Texas, South Texas, Gulf Coast, Arklamis, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. I think I got it. Did I repeat anything? I think that was all of them. Okay. So we'd have one tournament in there, and the division would designate which of the tournaments that they had was going to be, and the section would keep points total, and then give some prizes at the end of the season. Well, this ended up being like this really popular concept, and people started going and competing in these events, and people started doing these tournaments and traveling around to the different events in Texas and Louisiana, and eventually the Louisiana division decided not to participate anymore. A couple of reasons for that. That's okay. But we had this very, very popular series of events that was going on. And then all of a sudden, it started being used for athlete development. The coaches said, hey, we can use this as a place to send our young fencers that want to fence at the national level. So before they go fence at nationals, they go to the circuit. They go to the Southwest Section Circuit Cup, the SSCC. And then we had good fencing going on, and we needed good refereeing to go along with that. And so Jerry Benson spearheaded the effort to develop the referees in this region and train referees out of that. And we had some fantastic referees come out of that development program. Some folks who've gone on to get FIE licenses out of that whole thing.
Who are some of them?
Adam Brewer. We had, trying to think who, Adam Brewer, definitely. Andrew Lambton Abraham, another referee. Myself, I don't have an FIE license, but I've certainly refereed at the national level. I came out of that referee development program. Mike Ross did some work in the Southwest Section Circuit Cup. Andrew Foster. So many people came as we have trained referees through that over the years that I don't remember who all of them are. But a lot of good people came through that development program that Jerry Benson put together to help support the tournaments of the Southwest Section Circuit Cup. And then as the rock system was starting, and we can talk a little bit about more of that later on, the Southwest Section Circuit Cup sort of went away, and it wasn't used anymore. Some of the tournaments still exist. Some of the tournaments are now regional events for USA Fencing, but it was a great thing while it lasted, and it was really, really instrumental, I think, in helping to develop fencing in this part of the country.
Well, and did other places around the country emulate that, or did they just kind of come up with that idea? Because I think there's the Bay Cup series and a couple of other series that are in the country. Do you know if they were influenced by this one, or if they just kind of sprouted up all by themselves?
We kind of all influenced each other. We were all taking pages from like what worked. And I would talk to the folks who ran the Bay Cup, and they'd talk to me, and they'd say this would happen there. The Southwest Section Circuit Cup was actually one of the first. We were actually some of the first events to use Ask Fred outside of the Pacific Northwest. We needed a way to be able to figure out who was coming to our tournaments. So I found this thing called Ask Fred. And so I called up Pete Sasaki, and I was like, hey, man, can we use this? And he was like, sure, not a problem. And so we ran our circuit on Fred. We were some of the first events to go out there. We ran our point system on Fred eventually. It was great.
You also served on the board of directors for, I think it was the USFA at that time. Why did you want to serve, and what did you hope to accomplish?
So when I was on the board of directors for USA Fencing, I was a sectional representative. At that time, each of the sections sent somebody to be their representative to the board of directors. And so Jerry Benson had been our sectional representative, and he was elected to a vice presidential position for USFA at the time, USFA. And so I had been running the Southwest Section Circuit Cup. I had been served as section vice chair, and it sort of seemed like the next thing to do around here. I was like, oh, okay, we need somebody to do it. David, can you step up and be our representative? And I was also refereeing at the national level. I was attending all the tournaments. I'd been involved in the nominating committee for USA Fencing for that election series. That was the election that elected Callie Weeks, and Jerry Benson was one of the vice presidents, and Mark Stassman was one of the vice presidents. Rosa Bolvaro, and treasurer was Greg Dilworth. So I served on the board of directors, and this was just after Beijing. So it's interesting. Beijing was this amazing thing that happened. And I remember quite clearly we come into the first board of directors meeting in Chicago. And everything was on this amazing high note. We got 6 medals in Beijing. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. Swept the women's saber. Men's saber took a silver. The men's saber team took a silver. All these other great things that happened. And then we go into the first board of directors meeting, and there is this rumblings of, well, we've got some debt left over from the Olympics and the run up to the Olympics. Okay, so, well, how much? Well, we're not really sure. Oh, and our executive director is leaving us, and he doesn't know how much we had. And so there was this litany of every month we'd get a statement of the financial position of USA Fencing, or USFA, and it kept getting worse and worse and worse. It was horrible. I mean, it was, oh my God, all of a sudden we're millions of dollars in the hole, and we don't really know how we got there. So that first board meeting in Chicago, there were a lot of plans. There were a lot of things that we wanted to do. One of the things we did was actually we started what's now the ROC system, and we've put policies in place for the SYCs, and we formalized the RYCs. And I actually was going through some notes back in some files, and I found 6 pages of handwritten notes on yellow paper that Aaron Clements and I sat down to map out what the ROC system could be and what it would look like. It was Rose Salvovaro's idea, and he basically said, here, we're going to do this. You go do it. And I was like, why me? He was like, well, I hear you ran this really great circuit in Texas, so obviously you can do it. And I was like, can I have a season to plan? And he was like, no, we need the first events to happen this season. I was like, oh, Aaron, can you help me with this? And so, we kind of took it from there. There were a lot of other similar great ideas that came out of that first board meeting in Chicago that had to be shelved because at that point USA Fencing was in survival mode. Mm-hmm. It was touch and go. The auditors were screaming at us. We didn't know where the money had gone. We didn't know what was happening. The USOC was really angry at us, and there were some threatening things that were said at that point. And so, yeah, I'm very proud of the work that we did in starting the ROC, and I served on the ROC, what was now the ROC Development Committee, and sort of helped this idea of regional tournaments come into fruition, events that are below the national level, that serve fencers who are maybe not necessarily quite ready to compete at the national level. That was the idea. We wanted something for those people who have outgrown competition in their division, but can't quite compete. They can't make a 32 at a Div 1 NAC, was the idea. That was the original idea behind the Rocks. And I'm glad to see the system still going on. I'm glad to see it's developed. We now have the RJCCs, the junior and cadet events. The SYCs, of course, have gone crazy beyond anybody's expectations, I think. And now we're renting out facilities for these regional events that are as big as NACs were back then. That's crazy to me. But it's also cool. I think it's fantastic. But it's also crazy sometimes, too.
Well, talking about tournament organization, you are recognized as being part of a group of people in this area that runs really good tournaments. So what does it take to run a quote-unquote good tournament?
A lot of planning. There's just no other way to do it. 12 to 18 months out, you're contacting your venue, and you're getting your venue lined up. Note, that's before the bids go out. You have to have your venue lined up for these big events sometimes a year before you even submit the bid for it. Mm-hmm. And that's tricky.
Well, it's also a risk.
A huge one. Because they want a deposit. You have to have contacts with the referee community so that you can find enough referees to staff 31 strips. You have to have contacts with the armory community. So you have armors. You need to know bout committee people. You've got to have a stable of volunteers. You've got to have the ability to manage a group of people. You got to have some capital also. It's not cheap to put on a good regional event. You've got to have money that you've put aside. You'll get it back, but you got to pay. Hopefully, but you got to pay up front. You got to pay up front for the venue. You got to pay up front for the referees' airfares. Unless you're on the East Coast and everybody can drive, they're lucky out there. Regional tournaments on the East Coast operate under a very different system than those of us out in the rest of the country, where we have to actually fly most of our referees to our tournaments. So you got to put money up front for all that kind of stuff. You got to find a way to get grounded scripts, and then you have to have very thick skin, because people are going to complain about stuff that you don't have any control over, and they're going to complain about stuff that's, in some cases, well, anyway,
not your fault.
Not your fault, or stupid.
But you're the captain of the ship.
But you're the captain of the ship, and you're the one you're the boss, and you got to deal with that stuff, and you got to find a way to make those customers happy, and make them coming back to your tournaments and bring their friends.
Well, one of those tournaments that you helped create, where people want to keep coming back, is Sabre Cave. So, I love the story of Sabre Cave. You got to tell the story of Sabre Cave and how long it's been going on.
Oh, geez. Okay, so I mentioned a little while ago that Sabre in Texas was this sort of backwater. And there weren't a lot of Sabre fencers around. There wasn't a lot of Sabre fencing around. So when I was at Texas A&M, at the end of my freshman year, we were sitting around a table at a place called Star Pizza in Houston. And we were several pitchers of beer into the situation at that point.
Not just beer, but more specifically,
Shiner beer. And it was me, David Burns, and Alan Gall, fellow by the name of Alan Gall. And we were sitting there, and we were bemoaning the lack of good Sabre tournaments in the area. And somebody said, well, how about we have an only Sabre tournament? Oh, yeah, let's do that. Okay. Well, how about we give out bones and skulls for awards because, we're Sabre fencers. And somebody else was like, yeah, let's do that. Well, and let's hold it in a cave. Yeah, and we'll call it Sabre Cave. Well, you wake up the next morning and you realize, as you do in college, that not necessarily every plan that you have formulated at the wee hours of the night needs to be acted upon. But this one did. We needed to do this. And so we figured a way to make it happen. Sabre Cave has not happened every year, but we refer to Sabre Caves as having anniversaries. So we just celebrated our 24th anniversary of Sabre Cave. Or maybe it was 23rd.
I think it's 23rd.
We just celebrated our 23rd anniversary of Sabre Cave. And so we are going to have, next year 24, and hopefully after that 25. It's now a regional event. We bid it as a regional event. It's just Sabre. So we have, Div 1A and Div 2, and we have some cadet events and some junior events.
And a vet event.
And the youth events. And, yeah, It's fun. It's not as serious as some of the other regional events. We like to have fun at Sabre Cave. But we also have good referees. And we have good fencers who come.
Yeah.
And it's been going on for a long time. And we put a lot of care into it. And I'm hoping when we have the 25th anniversary of Sabre Cave, be able to bring some of the folks who fenced in the first one back and help us to celebrate with the original thing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit ago about how you became a referee, thanks to, in part, Jerry Benson. So why did you decide to become a referee in the first place? And what benefits do you gain nowadays from refereeing?
Why did I become a referee? Sometimes I ask myself that very question.
As you're standing in the concrete box for the 12th hour of the fourth day.
Heck, if it's only 12 hours, I'm doing good. I started refereeing when I stopped competing. I kind of had an injury that kind of wouldn't go away. It was something I had before I started fencing, and not having access to good training didn't make the situation any better. So that that's when I started getting into refereeing. Also, back when I competed, it was self-reffed. We all reffed. Everybody reffed, whether you were good or bad. And so you quickly found out if you were any good because your pool mates would take it out on you otherwise. But I was actually recognized as someone who could actually referee. And then, so I did that. And then I started doing a little bit more. I started refereeing at this, and then Jerry said, we're doing this referee training program here in the Southwest section.
Jerry Benson.
Jerry Benson, yeah. And so you should participate in it and do that. So I went and I did it. And Andy Shaw had just moved to this region. At the time, Andy Shaw was the foil referee in the United States. Now he's recognized as the guy who wears goofy suits and gives out awards at JOs.
He's the eccentric uncle of the tournament.
But Andy Shaw was the bomb back then. He refereed more Division I foil finals than I think anybody. The guy was a top-level referee. So I had the two of them. I took referee training courses from them, and they sent me out to take my exams. And I remember going to my first national tournament. It was in Mesquite, Texas, at the rodeo venue, and I had been part of the LOC, and we'd spent the night before laying down the copper strips. Back in those days, that's what we fenced on, the big copper rollouts. And I show up the next morning. I have my newly minted fresh sixes, and I go up to the bout committee platform, which is about 90 feet in the air. I have my blazer and my gray slacks, and I was told to go ask for Jerry Baumgart. I had no idea who Jerry Baumgart was, but I'm going to go up there. And so I go up there, and I say, "Excuse me, I'm looking for Jerry Baumgart." And this woman looks over the edge of the bout committee platform and basically says, "Who the F are you, and what the F do you want?"
That sounds about right.
And so I said, "Well, hi, I'm David Sierra, and I'm here to be a walk-on referee. I was told to look for Jerry Baumgart, and Jerry Benson and Andy Shaw said I should talk to. Is that you? Are you Miss Baumgart?" And she said, "Yes, I am," and then turned around and left me standing there. And she was talking to somebody else up there, and then eventually they said, "Okay, well, what weapon do you want to work in?" And I was like, "Well, I'm a saber fencer, and that's what I want to do." So they sent me out to referee a pool of, oh dear God, I think it was Division II men's saber, with Bill Gehring as my observer. And Bill Gehring spent the entire pool telling me how horrible I was. And then he came back after the pool and was like, "Okay, but you're fine. You can do this." I was like, "Wait, you just told me you spent 90 minutes telling me how horrible I was, and now you say I'm okay? I don't understand." But that's just sort of the way things happened back then. And so I started doing refereeing. I refereed a couple more NACs that year. Of course, I did epee and I did foil and saber, and just was working. And I enjoyed it initially because I was also starting to get into coaching at the time, and it was a way for me to see what was going on. Like, what are fencers doing? How do fencers do stuff? And how do coaches instruct their athletes on strip? And what are they telling them to do? Okay, so it became professional development for me, basically. And then I started getting more involved in refereeing. I started going to all the NACs, or just means I get hired for, and summer nationals, and and then next thing I turn around and I'm a senior level referee, and now I'm hiring and assigning for NACs, which is kind of weird.
What is the job of an assigner anyway?
Okay, so at a national tournament, an assigner is the head referee for an event, excuse me. And the assigner helps to select the referees that are being used in that event in consultation with the referee coordinator, who's the head referee for the whole tournament, and in consultation with the other assigners who are working at that tournament. The assigner then also looks over what the computer has put in for the randomization of the referees to the pools. That's supposed to be done by computers. A lot of times the assigner will pair up stronger and weaker referees together in the pools. Then the assigner is supposed to then go out and watch how the referees are doing in the pools and see what's going on, who's having a good day, who's having a bad day. Does somebody need to be pulled? Does somebody need to be promoted? Make initial sort of assessment. Then you go back up and you put together your strip plan for how you're going to run your DEs in consultation with the back committee chair. And you figure out, are we going to run 2 pods? Are we going to run 4 pods? Are we going to use the new David Sage method? How are we going to run this? And then you assign your referees into those pods. You select pod captains, or if you're using the David Sage method, you do this computer-assisted thing, and that's sort of complicated.
Well, David Sage is a complicated fellow, so.
Yes. So you do that system, and then you go through as the DE bracket goes out, and you're watching the referees. You also deal with any appeals that might happen. So if there's a problem, a question, or a rules consultation, you're there to deal with that issue. In some cases, you're there to deal with helping referees to overcome their nerves, helping the referees to perform well, giving feedback, both positive and negative. And it's important to deliver the negative feedback in a constructive fashion. And then you figure out who's going to do the finals. If it's a Division I or a junior event, that's going to be from the replay rounds from the top 16. If it's one of the other events, that might be top 8 or top 4. But you're still going to select those. Who's going to do the video, who's going to do the head referee on the strip, who's going to be the boom operator. And then who gets the gold. And then gather everybody up and give them feedback as a group. Did they do well? Did they not do well? Does anything need to be addressed? And then repeat the next day.
Mm-hmm. And rinse, wash, repeat.
Yeah, and then the other thing you do is you go back and you figure out at the end of the day who did well. Does anybody deserve a rating increase, or does anybody deserve additional promotion? Does anybody we should look at for other stuff? And there's a whole series of paperwork with that. Did anybody referee above their level? And so you note that on the forms, and you send that in to the referee coordinator, and he compiles all that data, and it goes to the referee committee, and they deal with it at that point. Mm-hmm. It's not a perfect system, but it works pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you also have become a referee mentor for many referees. What is the process that you've helped create to train and develop new referees?
So I can't really take credit for creating anything. It's more along the lines of following good example from people that I've worked with in the past. Jerry Baumgart, like I mentioned, as scary as that first interaction was with her, she became a very, very good guide for me. And she taught me a lot about the process of refereeing and how to function as a referee. Sharon Everson, same thing. Losing the two of them at pretty much the same time was a big hole to the referee community in the United States. But it's also given the opportunity for other people to step up. So I also, again, followed the example of Jerry Benson and did a lot of work here in our region. First of all, identifying who wants to be a referee is important. Do they have the ability to see actions? Can they follow what's going on? Do they have some basic understanding of fencing? Not every good fencer makes a good referee. And not every good referee is necessarily a good fencer, although you have to have some understanding of a sport. And so trying to help people to navigate the process of what do I need to do to get hired for a local event? What do I need to get hired for a regional event? What do I need to do to get hired for a national event? Watching over them, talking to them about their experiences, Being a shoulder to cry on sometimes is important. Helping them to navigate some of the interpersonal interactions, shall we say, that happen, both positive and negative. Helping them to deal with those kind of situations. I enjoy that work, but it's tough. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of time. And, I just finished hiring for Junior Olympics. I was the hiring referee for Junior Olympics. A lot of that was, it's really easy to do in some senses because there's a list of people who want to work, but then we needed more. And so I had to go to people that I know that are doing work in regions and find out, okay, who do you have coming up? Who's good? Who deserves a shot at the national level? Also, people that I saw in my travels working at regional events. We went out to the Capitol Clash, and there were a couple of folks that I saw there, and I was like, you need to come and work JOs. And they did, and a couple of them did pretty well. Mm-hmm. So, I was happy about that. Mm-hmm. And then I've also, done referee training in our club. Refereeing, I think, is an important part of training fencers. You need good referees as well. And we've had some people come out of our club that are national level referees that have earned 5s and 4s. So I'm very happy about that and very proud of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, all of this has been super interesting. Of course, I knew a lot of this already, but I'm delighted that we're finally able to share it with listeners out there all over the world. We'll finish up this interview with a mixture of famous questions from James Lipton and Marcel Proust. What is your favorite word?
Yes.
What is your least favorite word?
Hate.
What sound or noise do you love?
The sound a Sabre makes hitting a coach's plastron.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The incessant beeping of scoring machines that have not been turned off.
I think a lot of people would say that one. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I had the opportunity to do another profession. I was a research scientist for many years before I became a full-time fencing coach. I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the intellectual stimulation that came along with that job. I think if I had to do something else, I would probably be a nature tour guide.
Yeah, you do like bird watching, so that would tie in with that.
Yeah, and hiking and, camping and fishing and that kind of stuff. That would be something I would enjoy doing.
Yeah, all that Boy Scout training you had.
Right, yes.
What profession would you not like to do?
Tax attorney.
Where would you like to live?
South Brewster County, Texas, a.k.a. Big Bend country.
What do you value most in your friends?
Shared experiences. To me, that's what makes friendship, is things that you've done with people, places you've gone, conversations you've had, things you've seen, things you've done together. That's one of the reasons the referee cadre is so tight, is because we have shared experiences together, and we do stuff together, and we travel to exotic locales like Richmond, Virginia, and that beach in Virginia that shall never be named again, or Portland, Oregon, or all the various different places we've gone together as a group and a community, and we've shared experiences there.
Who is your hero?
Anybody who has the guts to get on and strip and fence.
And what is your motto?
It used to be a saying by Emiliano Zapata, which translates as, it's better to die on my feet than to live and to continue to serve on my knees. As I've grown up and as I have become a more mature individual, shall we say, and one who has learned to pick his battles, I don't really have one right now. But if I had to pick one, I guess it would be enjoy every minute while you've got it.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and chatting with me today. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, Kate. It was a great interview.
A big thank you once again to my friend and teammate, Tony Escueda, who edits all of these interviews and who has produced all the music for this podcast. Thank you as well to my executive producer and husband, David Sierra, who always proofreads my questions and gives me ideas for new interviews. Big thank you to all of you listeners out there who have been so supportive and who keep asking me for more episodes. Please email me at sabercoachkate@gmail.com if you have any ideas for interviews or questions you'd like me to ask people. You can also visit my blog at sabercoachkate.wordpress.com for articles about fencing in general, or also a place to download all of these episodes in case you don't have access to iTunes. You can find this podcast, of course, on iTunes, and you can also access every episode on my new Sabre Coach Kate podcast YouTube channel. I hope you can check it out.